Hi, this is William Paul Liggett from Junk Text, and we're going to get into more of my video lectures, all right? But before we do, we're going to get into one good joke, all right? You ready for it? Here we go. What word is always spelled wrong in the dictionary? Wrong. You know, like the word wrong.
All right, so I just want to kind of give a brief kind of visual overview of the flow of the lecture. So we will eventually get into the very, very fun part of actually using Microsoft Access to create standard SQL queries that we're going to get into. We're going to avoid all the kind of graphical, easy peasy ways, and we're going to get into the real deal stuff that you're actually going to care about on the job at various places, because what you're going to get out of this is the query, the SQL syntax. You can use it in so many other systems, such as MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and so forth. All right, and because what I am doing, I'm using Microsoft Access as a good kind of orientation training tool to get there. The thing though is that before we get into the fun kind of stuff that you're seeing visually right now, we're going to go through a bit longer portion where I'm basically briefing you through lecture slides of how the syntax works and why you would want to write it a certain way, such as this thing that we get into covering. What I'm showing you right now is talking about how to not include certain rows if they match a certain value. But you have to, there can be strange results that you think, like, wait, this should work. Why doesn't it work for what we're doing here? And one of the things I go into later is talking about, say, finding what's referred to as null values. So in this one of these examples, one of the employees is not actually assigned to any department, and we're trying to find only certain people, but that person just doesn't show up. Okay, so I then expand upon what I presented already in the slides and so forth to really drive home much more of a deeper theory of why you would even write your syntax a certain way to get the results that you want. All right. So basically, what I'm getting at is, please don't take the. I know it's like a 2-hour and a 20-minute video, but what my goal is to have you actually understand this technology. I'm not really interested in doing a quick 5-minute video where you feel like, oh, I've been exposed to it. What am I doing now, and what do I learn next? That this is basically a complete course to have you learn so many aspects. All right, so stick with me and let's start learning more about database. All right, I hope you're excited. Okay, so let's get into learning about some fun SQL syntax. I know this is very exciting for a lot of you to learn this, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. All right. All right, here's some things though that you definitely want to, before we get into this too far, that you don't want to get tripped up on some simple terminology that basically also just gets kind of talked about in the industry. So you don't want to sound kind of clueless if you don't understand what they're talking about on some basic things. So an easy one, obviously, is this one of DB. A lot of you might already know about this thing. It's just a generic term to mean a database. You might run into certain folks. What I will say about this, when I say a generic term, is some people and some authors of books and so forth. Like I understand their point that technically the database is actually like a digital file on a computer, and it maintains lots of structure of the database, and it's very specific, all this data and other things, data dictionaries and so forth. But I tend to shy away from that concept because I feel like it's a little onerous, and I don't, nobody, like, because the thing about it is what I'm going to present later is showing examples and say like Microsoft Access, and it creates a very specific database file. So my take on this is not to get so intense about the technicalities of what is considered the database versus what is considered, say, this term here, the relational database management system. Because honestly, when you say you would create something in Microsoft Access, well, you're not really going to try to open that same database file in something like MySQL, all right? So this is my kind of take on things, all right? So I just say this because you might run into people who might actually argue you that you're incorrect, but I feel like it's being a little too intense in that regard, all right? So anyways, DB is just a database, okay? And then we have, which I just kind of touched on a little bit, the RDBMS. That's kind of a long-winded acronym. You see it more in writing rather than somebody actually saying that acronym, because instead they'll just say like the database system or something like that, or if you really want to sound fancy, you say the relational database management system. All right. Now this technology is very common. It's very, I don't think it's going to go away. Here's why I say that is there's actually a kind of competing technology where it's referred to as, say, like NoSQL. I'm not even listing that acronym here because I'm not dealing with that type of technology. Where realistically it's a non-relational database system. Those other kind of systems are great for specific purposes, usually handling like big data or data that's coming in like very quickly, like a lot of data, and those can definitely be useful type database systems. But what I'm going to present in this video is talking about SQL that deals with more traditional relational database management systems, such as the ones you can see listed here. And there's many of these things. That's the thing. So I'm going to show you Microsoft Access. I'm doing that in Microsoft Access because I think it's actually the easiest system to kind of get oriented to with a lot of the database technologies that I kind of joke. I use basically like Microsoft Access like a tricycle, right? So instead of, say, teaching you how to ride a bike, without training wheels and stuff like that, Microsoft Access is like the easiest one to get kind of used to. It's a more graphical interface and so forth. And then when you kind of graduate on, you get more advanced, then you could go into these other type systems, such as MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, and there's like hundreds of these different database systems, all right? So, but the thing is, though, what I'm going to show you, regardless that I'm using Microsoft Access, I'm going to show you SQL syntax that, for the most part, like should basically work in all of these other systems. So that's the thing. I want you to, the takeaway is what I present in here is that you should be able to feel comfortable to just jump into some environment. They're using some other system. That's really not a big deal because you can use basically what I'm presenting to you in lots of different systems. Now, moving on to other terms. You might have already read through the slide here. But so we have SQL. The way you can think of this is it generally stands for the structured query language. I say it like that. Some people argue that it doesn't really stand for anything. Maybe, I don't know, like per various standards bodies, maybe they technically. I find that kind of annoying. Like it's basically an acronym. Let's just call it the structured query language. I don't know, make this more complicated than what it is. And what this is doing for you, here's also kind of a slightly confusing concept, is some people, like even there's like what's referred to as the TOB index, they like to categorize SQL as like an outright programming language. I don't know. I don't really buy that argument completely. At least in the basic form of SQL that we're dealing with. Like SQL is super powerful. It's amazing. It's just meant for kind of a different purpose. It's not like you're trying to design, say, like a full-out mobile application in SQL. Like, that's not the point of why you would even use SQL. Maybe you could hurt yourself and try to do that, I guess, but it's like that's really not the concept of what you're trying to use. Instead, you could be generally more safe by saying it's a computer language, right? This is like kind of pivot on the terminology, because people take they will debate you if you try to. Some people will say like, well, SQL is a programming language, and then somebody will pipe out saying, no, technically it's not, and da-da. So it gets into this concept called like Turing complete and things like that. Anyways, without getting into the weeds of the history of all these languages and the nuances of everything, the basic idea with SQL is you're trying to like talk to a database, all right? And when I say talk to a database, you can do lots of different things with it. Like you can pull data, like grab data, update data, insert data, delete data. You can create the whole system, like the database itself and tables and all this other kind of stuff with just SQL. One caveat though is, since I'm going to be presenting this in Microsoft Access, Access is more kind of a graphical run type system, so they kind of nerf SQL. They kind of like limit a bit more of its capability, but the main heart of how it functions still works the same when you're using SQL in Microsoft Access. So that's what you're going to get the takeaway, seeing the rest of the aspects. All right. Then there's this other terminology. You should just kind of be aware. People talk about, oh, we need to get a DBA, or, oh, are you trying to be a DBA or something like that. What they're talking about is you are a database administrator. Now, to me, a proper DBA knows lots of things more than just SQL, because database technology, there's actually a lot to know, especially when you get into design elements, Boyce Codd normal form versus fourth normal form, all these other kind of aspects that a true database administrator would really comprehend completely. Basically, this is like a job. You could get a job as a DBA. So, watching this video and studying more, you can definitely gear yourself into trying to apply for one of these types of positions. All right? Okay, let's keep going. Now, you've heard a bit of a spiel. I just went over talking about, well, what is SQL, right? So, a lot of people say that it stands for the structured query language, right? And I mentioned this is how you talk to a relational database. A lot of the concepts of where this even started with, well, especially relational database technology, it started way back in the 1970s. And honestly, it has evolved, here and there and stuff like that. But the heart and soul of how basically everything still works in this realm is not that different from how it was from 1970. Okay, and it all started by this individual, Dr. Dr. Edgar F. Codd from IBM, and it was So this is an older kind of technology, relational database technology, and then later on, IBM, for instance, they ended up creating the syntax that became SQL. Now, one of the things, some of you, when you're hearing me talk, you might be kind of peeved that I say SQL, right? There's this kind of obnoxious kind of debate that persists even to this day. It still is not, from the 1970s, you figure they would have squashed this debate somehow, right? So what I'm getting at is there's some people will protest. They'll be like, no, why are you saying SQL? You're wrong. You should say SQL. That's the proper way to saying it. And it's well, it doesn't really matter, because here's the thing. IBM way back in the day, I forget the exact year. It wasn't 1970. It was a little bit later than that. And they actually created the language SQL, right? And that's what they wanted to call the language. The problem is they actually ran into a trademark issue. There was a kind of an aircraft company back in the day that had I believe the registered trademark on this situation. So since IBM, they like getting things patented and things wrapped up in intellectual property, they're like, you know what? Well, we can't trademark this name SQL, so we're gonna change it. So they reduced it down to SQL, like SQL in here, so you have different people, even prominent, like even some of the designers, creators of this language, they also call it SQL, but whereas other prominent people, they call it SQL. So you have this hardcore debate between people of it's SQL, no, it's SQL, 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 and it's like, you guys are killing me here. It really doesn't matter. You're talking about the same thing. It's almost like the argument of me saying if I say hello and you say hi, you'd be like, well, hello is better, and why would you say hi? That's shorter or something like that. It's just kind of a dumb argument, and realistically, it doesn't really matter. Okay, you can pronounce it how you like, SQL or SQL. Let's just get over this topic. All right. Okay, moving on though. Now, one of the cool things talking about this when you deal with relational database technology and stuff like that is, I argue this is actually good that we have SQL as an actual international standard. Okay, now some of you seeing this is yeah, whatever, some standard, blah blah blah, but actually this is a big deal, because one of the things is when you deal with you get into learning about the hip new NoSQL type systems, it's kind of like the Wild West right now. There's really not, to my understanding, any standards really with a lot of that. There's MongoDB, React, Cassandra, stuff like that. And it's basically different companies and organizations that are just competing with each other. It's just whoever dominates that's what's going to be the kind of de facto standard. But it's kind of like you have to read the tea leaves to figure out which one's going to be the standard. Whereas this thing, SQL, the general language of how this works, the cool thing about it is it's a standard, and so all these different systems, like I mentioned, MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, IBM Db2, things like that, they all should be following this just general standard of this. So the syntax I'll show you is they're all doing that. And I quote, here's this standard that they have out here. To my understanding, that's the latest, greatest. Let's see here. I'm going to escape it. I'll show you. Here is this, because I pulled up this organization, the ISO. That's a standards body, and blah, blah, blah. This is a standards number. And then to say if you go down, right, if you want the official thing, it costs you a bunch of money. That's in the Swiss money there. But they say that that it's updated every 5 years, and basically they're going through the process eventually. Da 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 da. So long story short, this is still the latest standard on SQL. One thing to kind of be aware is, like I mentioned, is so I list these organizations. I'm not going to talk too much on it. That most software vendors dealing with relational database technologies and so forth is they try to stick to this SQL international standard. All right. Now I caveat this by saying Microsoft Access basically does not adhere to that. They've locked into an older format of SQL syntax. All right. You can actually change Microsoft Access. There's a setting in there so that it uses a standard. But almost nobody does that, because first of all, you'd even have to be aware of this kind of quirky nature stuff. And so, by and large, nobody really uses that setting, to my understanding. All right. So one of the things with this is there'll be portions where I'll go over in my slides, or I'll just kind of mention offhand certain things that you kind of do it I'll put syntax up there, this SQL stuff, and I'll be oh, in Microsoft Access you do it this way, and then it's any other database system you do it this way. All right, so you got to kind of watch out for that. So anyways, moving forward though, there's also, this is more, it's part of SQL, I guess, but it's there's a kind of specific niche enhancement kind of thing to SQL, this is kind of a long-winded acronym. So you have SQL slash PSM, and you're like, well, what is PSM? And that stands for Persistent Stored Modules, and you're like, what are we talking about here? So basically the summary of this thing, and here's a standard for this thing. I'll show you where that one is too. This is actually a different, it's talking about SQL slash PSM, blah, 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 blah. And they say, oh, you can use a database language for declaring and maintaining persistent database language routines in SQL Server modules. So the point of this technology, it's pretty cool. All right, like I'm not bashing it. Okay, I do kind of bash it a little bit later, but I'm not directly attacking this technology as a functional, very powerful capability. Basically, what this is, and I'm trying to summarize it, it's like a programmer's version of SQL that you could have, say, something that you need to be running, you know, and you're really worried about efficiencies, how quickly your system is responding to many people, things like that. And there could be very core capabilities of how your, say, web application works or something like that. And say a lot of database activity, a lot of thinking, a lot of stuff like variables, various conditions, loops, and stuff like that. So we're talking basically programming language stuff. You can have that function on the database portion now, but I still go back to saying that, like, you're not really trying to design, say, like, even say a back-end website. You're not necessarily trying to do the whole thing in SQL slash PSM. I'd be surprised if you could do the exact all of that there. You could probably do a large portion if you wanted to, and there's different, even though there is a standard, one of the things that gets a little obnoxious is these different systems. I'm just listing 4 of them, okay? These are like the 4 most popular currently in industry. They basically call this by different names. So, for instance, if you're looking on like job postings of like various technologies, you have different versions of this PSM enhanced SQL thing, all right? So MySQL, they just basically called it stored procedures. Okay. And then Oracle, it's PL slash SQL. Related sounding one for PostgreSQL, you have PL slash PGSQL. And then for Microsoft SQL Server, you have what they call Transact SQL or TSQL. All right. Basically, you can do, they all got kind of like work the same behind the scenes of like implementing these extra enhancement, this PSM stuff, programming like version of SQL. But the syntax is actually different, okay, across the board just generally. So you got to watch out for that. I'm going to go to the next slide, and it should hopefully, you'll kind of see what, when I was talking about, I critique this a little bit, not completely as a general technology, okay, just it's slightly confusing. Here's the deal, that I have more of a background as a software engineer, but since the current, how things work in the industry is they want you to kind of be an expert in everything, and so very traditionally they want you to be like, oh, you got to know Java, PHP, Python, you know, stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, okay, great. And by the way, they want you to also know like SQL and so forth, right? Well, that's the thing, that a lot of programmers like me, okay, we definitely use SQL. It's like 20% of, you're dealing with some database when you start doing coding stuff, like 20% of your time, you got to worry about either SQL or like the back-end database or something like that, all right? The thing though is, like, I am not an expert on PSM at this stage. Maybe later in time I'll care, but I don't really know if I want to. I'll do it if I'm like forced to. I can pick it up. It's not that difficult. It's just that here's the thing, is that you could do a bunch of stuff, say like if you're a Java programmer and you're like, well, okay, we're creating some like game, or something like that. And you're like, all right, well, we create all the game logic for the most part. All of it is done in Java code. And then like here and there sprinkled throughout the system, you kind of like maybe need to talk to a database to like record high scores or log a person into their game account or something like that, right? Well, how that generally works is like the heart, like all of 90% of your code is all like Java code, and then you have whenever you need to talk to a database to store data or retrieve data, that's when you basically just you have it's like kind of embedded in the Java code itself, but like you're putting that SQL inside of the Java code, all right? And then any of the other programming stuff, like let me back up here, any of the stuff dealing with like variables, if and else conditions, loops, all that kind of stuff. Well, it's like, well, that's the whole point of like Java and stuff. You do all that other logic, and then when you need to, you kind of do this other SQL stuff. So what I'm saying is a lot of programmers, a lot of software engineers, software developers, whatever you want to call us, that you don't really need to know this PSM thing, all right? The other takeaway on that, there can be design kind of architectural aspects that, what I'll say is this, is like, for instance, say you create say a game or whatever in Java, and then you do what I'm talking here where you're not using this PSM stuff. Well, say you were using, I don't know, MySQL or something like that as your backend system, and then for some reason you're like, you know what, we need to switch, let's switch to PostgreSQL and like have our game, whatever, we're switching technologies on the back end. Well, the thing is, for the most part, if you're using traditionally, a lot of how programs do this, you don't really have to rewrite that much code. Like, it should pretty much kind of work generally. If you're just using standard SQL, you might have to tweak some things here and there, but you don't. It's not like a great engineering effort to like switch out core backend database technologies, right? However, say for instance you're using Oracle. Now Oracle, they make great databases and so forth. It's a very well-known company, but that's the thing. Like how they maintain business, they're traditional companies. They want to get customers paying them money, right? So say you are spending a lot of money with your Oracle systems and you're like, hey, you know what? We're spending like $20,000 a year on this whole situation. Like, let's just switch to PostgreSQL, because it's like kind of similar, and we're gonna pay nothing for that, right? Well, the thing is, you might have to like design like all of your back-end thinking stuff. You might actually have to like literally like rewrite a bunch of your logic just to switch the system over here because they have like different syntax. There can be like conversion processes and stuff. I don't really fully trust all that. Maybe it works great, but that's kind of, there's kind of different ways to go on this pathway. So that's my argument here, is like this can be definitely, in some ways, it might actually work faster than say this stuff, because you're like dealing with the database, like the database is doing all the logic, and say if that's where the logic needs to happen, then technically it might actually be faster. However, if you need to somehow to switch to another system, you might go through a lot of pains to do that, whereas if you're not using any of that special PSM stuff and you're just using regular old school, not just old school, but just general SQL, you kind of don't, all right? So this is why what I'm saying is like a lot of programmers don't really get way too intense on some version of PSM, all right? Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. Let's get into the fun stuff, right? All right, so what this is doing is more of like, you'll care about this slide like later on. It's a good overview slide, like after you've already been informed of various SQL stuff. You might get a little confused, like, wait, what's the flow of how the syntax works? So that's what this gist is going on, all right? So we have, and I'm just going to go through the aspects using SQL, dealing only with selecting data, meaning we're just grabbing data that's part of a system already, and there's various ways to do that, okay? So what I'm saying here is this is what the syntax starts to look like, all right? Is you select some column, some other column over here, from some table. You could have conditions of what you're grabbing, and then if you care, you could order it, and there's other things you can do, but I'm just kind of giving you the main essence of SQL here. One thing I do want to mention, a good professional tip for all of you out there, is that when I get really tired of a lot of books, even a lot of like programs already written, drive me nuts. Like how they do their code here is they do this obnoxious thing where like everything in SQL, like they do everything all uppercase, or they do everything all lowercase. I'm like, why? Stop that. That's really obnoxious. Because first of all, depending on how you name like columns or tables or stuff like that, it gets confusing. You're like, wait, am I looking at SQL syntax or is that the table name? Like, what? Like it's not. Sometimes it's more confusing than you might realize. All right, especially when you sprinkle it like doing this stuff here, Java code, and then you embed SQL, and you're like, am I looking at Java, SQL, or what are we doing here? Like, just save your sanity. Like, you don't have to sit there waste minutes of your life trying to figure this stuff out. Just adopt this syntax that I'm doing here. Like any SQL stuff, just put it all as uppercase. All right, and then column names, just put everything lowercase. Table names, do this title case thing where like the first thing is T, blah 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 blah. If you have any separators, do not put spaces. Do not put like a dash minus thing. Use an underscore, right? And then here, all right. So trust me, it's just so much easier to comprehend what you're looking at later if you do this, all right? So, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. Like if you go in industry, they kill me sometimes. Anyways, let's keep going. So, and how the flow, what I'm going to do before I move on to various slides is I'm going to just kind of go through a bunch of SQL kind of slides of like, oh, this is how you do this is how you do that, this is how you do this, and then you're going to be like, okay. Well, I'm going to do this all up front now, so then you can kind of back up here and there and look at my slides to kind of compare and contrast what I'm doing later if you care to. So that's kind of what I'm going to do though, all right? Because after I go through the slides, I'm going to do a bunch of actual SQL queries, okay? And you're going to see how this all kind of flows, all right? Okay, so with that in mind, the most basic form of SQL is this, all right? What you're doing is you're just like, I just need to see I want all data from a table, all right? And to be clear, if you're not curious about what a table is, and say this is like your first video introduced to relational databases or something like that, is database technology is different than spreadsheet technology. However, if you just look at it from afar, a spreadsheet basically looks like a data table. You don't want to confuse the lingo. They're really meant for different things. And to be clear, a database isn't necessarily better than spreadsheet technology, nor is spreadsheet technology better than databases, because they're actually just meant for two different purposes, all right? Now, so with that in mind, what I'm talking about here is when we're getting a table, we're basically getting kind of like this spreadsheet looking thing, which people call a data table, all right? So the syntax, how this works is, say, select, this is a special thing where you're grabbing all, like every column that could be of a table, all right? And all the data. You just grab everything from some sort of table, and then you put like a semicolon at the end here, okay? Now, one thing is you don't necessarily need the syntax to be on different lines here. If you, depending on where you're writing your SQL, if you have that opportunity, it's usually better, just because sometimes it can get kind of complicated looking if you have it all on one line. You'll see how things get a little more advanced over time on this process, okay? And actually, before I move on from this, one of the things is this, you don't really want to get in the habit, especially for like serious projects and stuff like that. You really don't want, even if this is all you want to do is just grab all data from a table. It may sound kind of counterintuitive, but like especially for some production ready code, like meaning it's like live on the system, people are actually using your stuff, try to never use this select star thing. This is just more of like a quick offhand thing, or maybe you're doing something very special case, I guess. But you want to make sure that any columns and stuff like that, you like, even if there's like 20 columns of a table, you're like, you literally don't want to use this. You want to actually, I'll show you different ways that you want to literally list out every single column name. Part of that is, like, especially say if you design a website and it pulls data from a database, like, you don't want to, say you design the page for save in 20 columns or something like that. Well, then say later in time, say 6 months from now, somebody goes and changes the data table and adds another column. Well, that actually just messes up the whole front end page design. It can make your website look terrible because you went and did this and you're like, oh, I didn't realize this extra column is now part of this process. And so that's one of the things. Another thing, it actually can be a security vulnerability type thing where, like, say for instance they update the data table and they throw an extra column in there and it's like all the social security numbers of somebody. And so, like, then your website is just like accidentally like, and you go to this web page and you got everyone's social security number that works at this company, right? So that's why this is like, you kind of don't want to use this unless this is just a quick and dirty thing generally. All right. Okay. Here we go. Now, this is what I'm talking about. If you want, this is a better process of doing it. Like, use this habit if you're doing something more intense with your SQL here. All right. So what we're doing here, I'm just saying, hey, like, you want to grab only certain columns. Okay. In this case, it's grabbing column 1 and column 2. Now, this is not literal syntax. I'm just saying that this is kind of the flow of how this works. I mean literal syntax because it's like you normally wouldn't call the columns in your data table to be column 1 and column 2. Okay, you'll see more practical examples of how this all works, but this is kind of the gist. And say in this case, say there's 2 columns they're dealing with. The way you write it, you can see it, but it's like you have a comma here, right? Don't put a comma there. That's the thing. Like, some folks, it seems like you maybe want to do that. No, this can actually be an error if you throw an extra comma here. You're going to be very kind of particular. SQL is kind of a whiny language. If you do something wrong, it's just going to like break down on you quick. All right, so you got to be like very exact on this whole process. Now, this is slightly difficult to explain right away. I'm just showing there's a capability you might need to use from time to time where sometimes when you pull up a query, it kind of seems like you're getting redundant rows. You're probably not. It's just of the columns that you see, depending on your query, like, it might seem to you like the report you created, it's like, why do we have this, like, Bob Jones or whatever listed twice here? Like, I want to just see whatever. Well, to basically hide any redundant seeming rows, like, meaning you want to print it out or give it to your boss or something like that, you could use this little capability of, like, you select distinct, like, so even if there are redundant seeming rows, it like hides the extra rows that seem similar. All right. I'm just going to kind of move on. All right. That's kind of the gist of this. It kind of gets into an area where it comes useful later. All right. Now, check this syntax out. Is like, say you're like, okay, I need to grab some data and I don't need all of the data. I only need like a very specific exact thing. All right. So in this case, how you would write that, and like, so it's the same thing as before, like select column 1, column 2, whatever from some sort of a table. And then here we're saying where, like, some condition is here, meaning like, well, we only want, for column 1, we only want to see data that matches, in this case, if we wrote this code, it would have to, like, the data in, like, for each row to even show up, it would have to actually be some text value, like literally all of these letters in here, it would actually have to be that. Okay. You'll see later, I'll go through examples of like, oh, we want to find an employee that has this last name or something like that. Well, you would put like the specific last name or whatever text value you're trying to search on, you would do this process. Okay. Now, to do things properly, it feels a little unnatural, especially if you're used to programming in certain languages, that SQL, they like using single quote marks. All right. And not the fancy kind of like ones that kind of slant all cool or something like that. No, they got to be like these old school single quote marks. All right. And I say single quote because we actually don't want to use double quote marks. Some database systems are a little loosey-goosey with this process. They might let you use either one. I just don't get into this habit though, because some systems might break down on you. Like, what's going on here? You threw some syntax errors in here. So for SQL, for any like text value stuff, put it in single quote marks. All right. And I say it like this, especially for like if you're a Java programmer, it's like almost the reverse, right? Because like Java, they want you to use double quotes, and you like cannot use single quotes for like what they refer to as a string. But the thing, it gets a little goofy. Like other languages like PHP, JavaScript, Python, etc. They like whatever. There's like little here and there differences in those languages, but anyhow, the basic thing to remember on this whole thing, anything you throw like exact text value stuff or something like that, single quote marks. All right. Now, here we go. Say you're looking for other stuff. I'm just repeating this so you can see what I was talking about. And I'm saying the same code as before. The only line that I'm changing up is that where condition. So like, I'll back up real quick. So this is what I'm talking about. Like you'd have a more full out select some columns from some table, blah, 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 blah. Like I'm just changing up this line here. All right, just to show you like how you could search for different things. Okay, and I'm using this equals operators. Technically, it's like an equals to. This is how SQL does it. So yeah. So what I'm saying is like for an exact text match, I've just covered, you would do it like in this fashion, right? But if you're dealing with numbers, something is not like text because there's different data types in databases, all right? And so you would want, like if you're trying to pull up an actual just number of something, okay, then don't use quote marks, okay? So say like a whole number, it'd be like this. Or like if you're pulling up a decimal place kind of number, then you just put the decimal place number in there like that, right? And then obviously make sure on any of this stuff that you would end the final thing with a semicolon, like collectively it'd look like this, right? Blah, 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 and then semicolon. Now for dates, this is how Microsoft Access does it. The thing is, it's hard to kind of showcase, compare and contrast other systems. They all have their own little way of like searching the database for dates. Okay, so in Microsoft Access, this is how they do it. Okay, and what I'm talking about, they use this kind of number sign here. Okay, some of you hipsters call this a hash, value, or like hashtag, stuff like that, or a pound symbol or whatever, right? So they use this number sign as what's referred to as a delimiter. A delimiter, what that means is like you're kind of indicating in syntax wise different kinds of data in a sort of sense. So all I'm saying is like, say if you want to find, I guess in this case you want to find data from the system where the column 1, that there's data that literally looks like maybe a birthday of somebody, that we're trying to find this specific date, okay, like January 22nd, 1975. So it's not going to find, the day after or something like that. It's going to be this exact date because we're using this equals thing. But in Microsoft Access, it's using these number signs. This is how you write the code, basically. All right, just write notes. That's how you just remember. Just write notes in this thing. Okay. All right, now to do things like what I'm talking about, these wildcards, it's like you want to like start it out in some regard or have some other kind of setup. But like, say you're just like, well, say in this case, we want to find words that like just start with S. Okay, like Sam Sugar Sandals. Notice how like each word is like a different length. Okay, it doesn't have to be an exact length of something. All we care about is that literally the word starts with S. Okay, so to do this like broad partial match thing, you can see the syntax here, blah blah blah, select these columns from some table where column 1 like this is how you write it, like, and then it have these single quotes, right, S, and then this asterisk character. All right, this is how, the only thing is though, this is how Microsoft Access does things, and I kind of like this syntax a little bit better than what every other system is using. I don't really know why the standard switched it to use this obnoxious % thing, but that's what they like using. All right, I don't like this as much because, especially if you get into like command line stuff, like the Windows terminal or Linux command line stuff or whatever, you don't use this weird % nonsense. You use like the asterisk thing for doing similar aspects. All right. Anyhow, you just got to kind of know this. So in Microsoft Access, you do it this way. Every other database system that's out there, you use the % thing. Okay, that's kind of the gist of this. All right. Oh, and before I move on, notice that it says, like, okay, let me back up. When we were doing, maybe back up to here, when we're doing like an exact match of something, it's equal to whatever we actually type in here, we use an equal sign here, right? Now though, we use this thing of like, I kind of think of it like a Valley Girl, like from California. They're like, oh, like S and like that, and like, it's like, that's the, I don't know, this is the syntax that they use. So you don't use an equal sign here because we're trying to figure out like a broad match of things. So you use it like kind of like this kind of a deal. All right, so be aware of that aspect. Okay, moving forward though, there's a different way of also doing this wildcard kind of setup. But it's a little more like precise in a sort of sense. It's not that it's better, it's just for different reasons. Okay, so in this case, say we want to match like only 3-letter words that begin with, say, JA. So like, for example, like jar, jam, jaw, right? Well, the way that would work would be, it's kind of similar to this like thing, but instead of using the asterisk character or that % deal, in Microsoft Access, you use a question mark, which honestly, I like this syntax, but it just seems more logical to me. Anyways, this is how Access does it, right? And that would pull up these results if your data had that. But in any other database system, like, you basically use an underscore character, okay? And this only matches one character, okay? So you could kind of expand on this later. It's like, say if you wanted to match, like, instead of 3-letter words, like, say it starts with JA, and then there's like 2 characters you don't care if they change, you could do like JA underscore underscore kind of a thing, all right? So that's kind of the deal with that, all right? Okay. Now we're going to get a little more, we're just kind of expanding on this whole process. So for instance, and I'm going back to that equal thing, so that we want to have like 2 filters going on now. Like there's 2 things that we're reducing our data, like of what we see when we do this aspect. And if I didn't properly mention already, is that what we're doing in any of this SQL stuff, we're grabbing data, right? So what people say is we're querying the database. We are asking the database a question. And in this case, we're basically, we're like, well, we want to see, well, column 1 should match this text value, which literally would be all these characters here, which is kind of weird and unrealistic to have that. But this is just, I'm just putting this on the slide so you see what I'm doing here. And then you can have like, oh, and by the way, we want to have, say, column 3 to have literally this text in there. Okay. Now, what I'm saying in this note thing, the summary, is when we use the select statement up here, and we're saying we want to, this is like, which columns do we literally want to see presented to us, okay, when we run the query. The thing though is, you don't actually have to, like, you could have a, like, if this is like a hidden column that we're filtering on. Like, we don't care to see column 3, but we can still add this filter, like, that still applies. We don't realize, maybe, if we're looking at the report, that column 3 was involved somehow, but this is kind of a behind the scenes, like, filter on this process. All right, so that's how you do that. Now I'll show you in the next slide. Maybe this makes sense talking in English, like, oh, we want to select this stuff from some table where column 1 is equal to this and column 3 is equal to da 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 da, right? Well, this gets into this and thing. I'll show you in just a moment this kind of reduced concept of what's called the truth table. All right, so here we go. In this case, look, I'm going to change it up. Instead of an and, we could also use an or. They actually have, they are related. They're similar to each other, but they should be used precisely. You should be knowing why you're choosing one or the other. Okay, so what I'm saying, and this is a very simplified version of what's referred to as a truth table. Okay, it gets into this concept where it's referred to as Boolean logic kind of a thing, where you're comparing one value against something else, and it's like, is it true or false ultimately? All right, so the way that this logic works is like, true and true is true. Okay, but if you do this, true and false, well, that's all terrible. That's all false, kind of a thing. Okay, the easiest way to maybe understand the and thing, it's like the most intense situation. Like, in this case, let me say back up. We are only going to see data if literally, like, the data matches both of these conditions. Like, the row, we are only going to see a row for something if they literally both have both of these things going on, like, exactly. All right. Whereas the or, even though it looks similar, syntax, the same stuff, it's like way more, it's like loosey-goosey. It's like, well, as long as it matches, say, this thing, or, you know what, if it matched this situation. All right, so that's where or is more loosey-goosey. True or true is equal to true. But then look at here. Instead of it being false when we do true or false, well, it's true. Okay. Now, another thing that I didn't put up here is, like, say if you have false or false, then it's just false. Okay, it doesn't like magically become true or something like that. That's the deal. Okay, it's not that and is better than or vice versa. They're just really meant for two different reasons. Okay, I'll show you some live examples later of where this comes up. Okay. Now, okay, you might have to deal with what's referred to as null values, or like null data kind of a thing. It gets into this kind of obnoxious theoretical stuff in some regards and stuff like that. Basically, the way you can think of like null values, it's like basically a missing value or something like that. Like, say a person doesn't have a middle initial or something like that, right? Well, most people say have middle names or middle initials, but say every now and then somebody may not. And so, like, in your system, it's kind of like a blank, like, it's like a missing value. And null isn't necessarily bad. Like, sometimes it's kind of like useful, all right? Because, like, say that person that doesn't have a middle name, they're like, yeah, well, that's the meaning for them, right? We're just saying on the system is like that person doesn't have a middle initial. You're like, all right, sounds great, whatever. The thing is, though, you gotta, like, especially if you want to like find data like that, you gotta use special syntax to do this. Okay, so if you want to find like data, okay, and it's basically blank, it's kind of like nothing in a sort of sense, then this is what you use. where it'd be like, where some column is null or something like that. All right. Or the opposite of this thing, where like, well, we want to only see people who have, say, middle initials. Like, all right, well, this is how you'd write your syntax. I don't know why we would do that, but I'm just saying this is how you could do that. All right. Where column 3 is not null. All right. This is the gist. All right, so we're almost done through the slide portion here. Okay, there's just a few more aspects that I just want to touch on. That some of the stuff, like for instance, this equal to sign. You've already seen that before, like when we were looking for an exact text value, for some row to kind of have, not necessarily the row, but like the column to have type of a thing. But there could be other aspects that you might want to use, and this is pretty common. All right, so this is how SQL does things. This is their syntax for what you could call comparison operators. Okay, and I'm just saying, this is when you would use these types of symbols in like the where clause. All right, so here's the equal to. That's like something is literally equal to some value. Other things, it's like, if say, especially for like numbers and so forth, this is when you use a lot more of these ones here, where if some value is greater than, like, if it's greater than 50 or less than 50, or greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Okay, so this is how you write the syntax to have those types of meanings. Okay. And then there's this also kind of peculiar looking one here. I'll show you a little bit of that in a live demo in just a bit. But this is how you would say, like, not equal to. So you're basically trying to exclude one specific value, kind of a deal. Anyways, let's just keep going, all right? Moving on. Okay. Is that we have other ways, like we can grab data that's like a range of numbers. There's two different ways to do this. Okay, one of the aspects I'm showing you is this. There's this syntax where it's like between a range of numbers. All right, so like where we only want to see data where, like, say, column 2 is between 10 and 25. One of the things that, especially if you get like deeper ideas on what this means exactly, it's like this is called an inclusive between aspect, meaning like it's literally a value could be 10. It's like it's not excluding 10 and it's not excluding 25. It's like literally 10 to 25 including both of these end numbers is how this works. All right, but that's a gist in that regard. You can do the same thing though, as you can see here. Okay, another way you can do the exact same search of how you wrote it up here is you basically kind of use math in a sense. All you're doing is like, well, where column 2 is greater than or equal to 10, and you got to repeat column 2 again. Column 2 is less than or equal to 25. All right. Either of these work. It kind of depends on your style. What I will say is, if you write it this way, potentially it could be better. The only reason I advocate for that is that you don't have to, like, you only have to say column 2 once here, whereas here you got to say column 2 and then in column 2. And even though this may not seem like a big deal, maybe you actually have a typo here and you're like, column 2 is this and column 3, like, and you didn't realize you did that. Okay, so you could have strange results if you weren't really careful. All right, but that's kind of the deal with that. All right, so then a very practical thing that you need to do, especially when you want to create some sort of a report that you want to save later, that you need to kind of, you need to sort your data in some aspect. So the way you do that is, say in this syntax that you're looking at, I have it where it says, select column 1, column 2. You've seen all this stuff before, from a table name, some sort of table, and you want to order the output, meaning like say A to Z, kind of a thing, which is referred to as ascending, okay? And that's where you see where it says starts with ascending, like ASC. That's why this syntax here, you're ordering it ASC, ascending wise. One other thing that does bug me about Microsoft Access, from time to time they'll like try to simplify, I guess, your syntax, and so like they annoy me that like the default, I guess, if you use the order by, so they'll like when you save your query and then you go back into it later the next day or something like that, and you're like, wait, why did I get rid of my ASC thing? I really wish they would stop doing that. It drives you nuts, because I like to actually see, this is me, I like to see the formality of, oh, it's assorting in this kind of regard. We're ascending. So another thing is like, would be like a low to high value, meaning say if you're like climbing a mountain. That's how I kind of think of it. That if you're ascending it, then you're going, you know, up the mountain. Then if we go the other way, like here, descending, meaning going the other way down, so Z to A or high to low kind of a value, that's where you'd use this syntax, that it does the sorting in the other way through. So here was ascending, you go up, 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 and then like climbing a mountain, and then descending is going down, right? You're descending from there. So that's where this syntax, it's just DESC, okay? And okay, so that's the last slide that I have on all this. Now we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to show you how this syntax works with real data, okay? All right, so what I have here is I have this database that, for instance, I have like my students using and so forth, and I've already kind of built it up to some capacity here. And the main thing I'll just orient you on is there's two main tables that we're going to be dealing with. So over here, these are these data tables that I was telling you about, right? Where I was saying, you know, it kind of looks like a spreadsheet, but you don't want to say spreadsheet, okay? You want to say a data table. That, so for instance, it's like it's basically meaning it's like for some sort of like a company. It's like mock data for some sort of an organization like that. So they're tracking like their employees, where their employees work, yeah, stuff like that, okay? And these are the two main tables that we're going to deal with in this video. In other videos that I go into, we touch into other areas. So that's kind of the gist with that regard. So for instance, say like if I open this data table, this is all fake information. It's not like real people data, all right? That this is all it's tracking so far, is like every employee that's listed here, they have an employee ID. So you could say like emp ID or emp underscore ID. I'm just going to skip over saying underscore. It kind of slows me down. So I'll just say emp ID. And then, you know, we're just tracking their last name, first name, birth date, how much money they make per year, and then like which department that they're in, like what department ID we have, like a little department code thing. And so then you're like, well, what are these department ID codes? And that's where, so if we open up the department table, that's what we get more meaning of the, what, you know, we get some other details basically. It's captured more nicely in a separate table, okay? And so that's the kind of situation here in this regard. So if you see, say, like the A department, that corresponds with the accounting department, like the more long drawn out explanation of what that is. But like shorthand in data, we would have it like such, okay? And then basically each employee has a department, okay? So that's the overall gist of what we're dealing with. And so that's, I just wanted to kind of touch into that. Now, the thing is, you usually are not trying to just like do what I'm doing right now, where we're pulling up the whole table itself, meaning like the employees table and things like that. Sure, you could do this, but it can't, especially if you're just doing like a query and stuff like that, Normally, you actually just go and create a separate query, which I'm saying over here. There's a bunch of other stuff I go into in other videos and stuff like that. So you can ignore all of these things that I have saved. But that's what I'm gonna walk you through step by step of how to create various ways to like ask this database various questions. Okay, so that's the kind of gist. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close these tables down. All right, so let's see. I'll get rid of the employees table and then the departments table. So, like how I showed you before of just grabbing all data from a table. All right, the easiest way of doing this is in Microsoft Access. What we do is I'm going to go to Create, okay, and then I'm going to go to Query Design. I try to inform people, like, try to always, if you especially want to get real job industry skills, don't be lazy and don't try to use these query wizards. All right, like they might work for you, but you just you're not. It's not really the point of when you say you know how to use a database. All right, so be cool and use the query design window. All right, so go into this thing here. Now, also Microsoft Access, they always try to, like, I guess make things easier, but I feel like it makes it harder. Any of this graphical stuff, we're just going to ignore. So I don't even care about the show table stuff. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to be like, go away. I don't care about this. And then it shows us this kind of layout. You could refer to this as like query by example, QBE. And there's like, depending on, there's like, you can click which field, like fields or columns, and then like different ways of criteria and stuff. And I guess some people like this interface. I don't know, I get kind of annoyed with it. So I would not recommend even being super great at this. I'm going to skip over to the real deal stuff. All right. So we're going to go to SQL view. So what you can go in here is I'm going to change down here where it says view. You can click this little down arrow looking thing. And so I'll click that. And then you can click on SQL view now. All right. So we'll go into there. Now the default thing that it has kind of listed for us is just like it's like most times you're just trying to do a select. You're just trying to grab. Select means to like select data, it means to like grab data in some regard. So they kind of just start you out in like a basic form of this. All right. So like I was saying though, is let's go ahead and grab basically everything in the employees table, which effectively it's almost like I just double click the employees table and open it up. That's what it's going to look like. So the syntax for that, if you recall, looks something like this, like select star. You could do it this way, and then I'm going to press enter because we want the semicolon. We only want one semicolon, like once at the very, very end. But this is not the end all be all yet, because it's like, well, select, because what we're saying is select all columns, and then it's like, all right, from, you know, like what table do you want it from? So then that's what you get into writing like this, like from the employees table. Okay. Then what you can do is you can go up here and you click on the little run button. So I'll click run, and you're like, oh, there we go. It looks just like I double clicked on the employees table, but it's actually now, if you notice here, it says query 1. All right. And that's that. That's pretty much it. And then we could also go back to SQL view, you know, because what we're looking at, this is an access lingo. They call this datasheet view. Okay. So here we can go back to it here, click down this. Instead of datasheet view, we're going to go back to SQL view. So this is the SQL that you saw, right? And then, you know, you could either click run, or you can go back to datasheet view. It's the exact same thing. All right. Now, say for some reason we thought this is a useful query, we can actually save this query. We don't have to just like, it's not just a one-time, one-off thing. You know, sometimes that's all you need. But I'm going to go through every example that I show you. I'm going to actually save my queries. Now, the thing with me, especially with how I'm trying to teach you this stuff, I am doing it kind of in a certain order. So I'm gonna order my queries numerically. Now this is just me, how I'm doing it and presenting it. So that way you're not confused. Like, why is there like numbers to all of his queries? That's just because I'm doing it in this sort of fashion in this video for you. Okay. So what I'm saying is, say we did our query, right? Now, if I click this X thing, Access can be like, wait a minute, do you want to save this query? Like, do you care about this thing later? Like, and it's like, yeah, we do. So I could say yes, and it'll save it as query 1, but that's kind of a pointless name to me. It's like, well, what was query 1? What was I doing with query 1, right? So I'm going to click on cancel, and then go up to here. This is my process. There's other ways of doing this. I just find this the easiest to navigate through. Is I'm going to do this where I'm going to right click on this little tab thing, and then I'll click save. This stage, this is what it'll let me type something else, and I highly recommend calling it something way more memorable than query 1. All right. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is, this is my convention. I'm going to have a bunch of these queries. You're going to see why I'm putting. So I'm going to start out with 2 zeros. Looks kind of weird, but I'm going to have like 12 or 14 of these queries. All right. So that's why I'm just going to keep it like that. So, and all we're doing in this thing is we are selecting like all of the employees. So I'm going to say select all from employees. All right. And then I'm just going to click OK. Notice how it has renamed this thing to whatever I just typed. And then it put it over in this queries type area right there. All right. So watch. So if I close this out, we should get some sort of pop-up now. And then all you have to do is just say, double click this, and boom, we got the same query that we did before. And then we're like, wait, what was the SQL to this? So we could go back up to here and click SQL view like I showed you before. You could also, I get it, if you can see down here, this is my mouse way on the lower right hand side. There's actually these little buttons down here, so it's can be faster for you. You just come over here and just click on SQL, right? And then you can see the syntax for that, right? Okay, so that's the gist there. I'll go back to datasheet view and click this little button there. All right, now let's keep on moving. All right, because normally when you're doing queries, you don't usually even want to get in the habit of using that select star thing like what I did here. This is actually just for quick and dirty things. We're just trying to quickly grab some data, just see if we got access to the system or something like that, right? Instead, we usually want to like specify which columns we want to use. All right, so what we're going to do is, say we only need to see a report, like instead of seeing like all of these columns, we only need to see like the last name, the first name, and then like the emp ID. But also, when we're using SQL, all right, is we can reshuffle the order of the columns as we see fit. Like say for instance, like current design of this table, right, it is showing it in this fashion, like emp ID, last name, first name, right? But what if for the report that we care about is like, well, actually I want to see the last name. It's just gonna like, I want to be able to look at my data in a certain way, and I want to see the last name column first. All right, so that's where the SQL query in this regard can definitely help you. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a whole new query. All right, and I'm going to do this for every example that I do this for you. All right, so I'm going to click on create query design. Right, again, I don't care about this graphical stuff. I don't care about showing tables and stuff. Ignore all this type of interface, and then you can also just click where it says SQL here. You can just click on that thing. All right, so here's the default select thing that Microsoft has for us, right? Now, I'll do that query that I was telling you about. We only want to see certain columns and in a certain order. So, like I said before, is we want to see the last name, comma, first name, comma, and then emp ID, right? Then, one sec. I'll go to, and this is from the employees table, right? Okay, so that should work. I'm going to run the table, or the query, sorry, and that's what we did. We can see, so we changed up the order of the columns just by how I specified the syntax of the columns in the query. All right, so last name, first name, emp ID. And it's now, look, it says query 1, right? I'm gonna rename this thing. So this is me again. I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna number it 01 now. All right, because now this is like, I started the last one was 00 because it's like you kind of don't want to use that. Is what I'm implying. Because we were doing that select star before, but now since I'm doing more proper SQL syntax, I'm gonna say 01 employees, and I'll just call it like with emp IDs. Okay, and notice how I'm also separating my queries here with, if you can see this little tiny looking font here, these are actually underscore characters. I just have this one highlighted. That don't, like Access will let you use spaces or like a dash and stuff. Don't do that. It's really terrible. Like, it's just a bad way, because then you have to, especially when we work with this later, somehow reference it later. It's just a really bad habit. All right, so only use underscores to separate different words and stuff like that. Okay, and then there we go. We got that, and then I'll go back. You can see the SQL again, and that was that. Now, before I move on, what I will do is kind of a newbie mistake that some people get into, and they're like, "Wait, what? Why isn't it working now?" Is say right here, say we have, select last name, first name, emp ID from employees, right? What if we have a typo? Like, say instead of it said last name, what if I get rid of the E thing here, and I get rid of that, and it says last name, right? And it's like, well, maybe when we were typing it, we didn't notice it, we had a typo. Okay, but watch this. I'm going to try running this query. Okay, I'm going to click this. Oh, boom. If you ever see a dialogue like this is usually not a good sign, because this is like, it's like, what are you talking about? What is this? And you got to basically be very careful. It's like, why does it say last name? Oh, wait a minute. It should say last name. So in this, I don't want to click OK, because then it's going to give some nonsense stuff to us. I'm going to click cancel. So, and I'll fix this again, last name. So I just wanted to present this because a number of students run into that, and they like totally get stuck. All right. And I'll save that again. I'll run the query again. Boom. Right? Everything's all good to go. Yeah. Now, let's see here. I will go into, I'll just go back to SQL view. Oh, by the way, if for those that care, you can change the size of this thing. I actually prefer having a bigger font. I mean, I know I'm doing this for the video, but I actually like when I'm working with code and stuff like that. I don't like this little teeny tiny font that Microsoft Access likes showing you. And so where you would go, you got to go in a few different areas. You go to like File, you go to like Options, and then you go into here. There's like different areas. You got to go into like, let's see here, not current database, like data sheet. You got to change like the font size. Here I made it say 22, and then Object Designers. You could change the font and stuff like that. Size 22. For me here, that's what I did there. So, and I think those are the two main areas. And sometimes you actually got to like restart Access again to make the effect kind of come alive. So that's where you can increase the font size of both like the SQL code, but also just like how your data table and your queries, like when it's run, how big the font size is. Okay. And actually, since we're looking at it, notice how there's even a little check mark kind of option here. We could have this setting where it says query design, SQL Server compatible syntax, ANSI 92. Well, if we check this, especially for like both of these, this is what I was talking about, where Microsoft Access currently by default does not follow the latest greatest SQL standard. That's where this is more, this is where you go to fix that, but like no one does this. Okay, so it's kind of like, all right, whatever. Anyhow, so I'm gonna get out of these options. I didn't make any changes there, and so yeah, I just wanted to show you that's the kind of setup. All right, I'll go back into datasheet view for here, and this is how things look. Okay. All right, so let's kind of keep on moving here. All right. So what if we only want to see, instead of, we see all the employees and such, but like, say we want to see last name, first name, and the employee ID, but say we only want to see the employee for like Zamora. Okay, it's like, how could we only see that row? Well, where you could do that, like, well, I'm gonna just do another query. All right, so I'll go to, create query design, or we could do this process, create query design, all that kind of stuff. Since this is basically the query that I'm going to write is very similar to this one, I'm going to kind of speed up some of my input of the syntax. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to here. I just highlighted this, and then I'm going to go like copy this thing, like copy this query, and then I can just kind of paste on top of it in a sort of way. It's just where the area of where we're dealing with. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to rename this thing. The next query I'm going to show you is just like, finding only that employee of Zamora. So I'm just going to rename this to be like the second query, employees. I'm just going to kind of shorthand like L name for like last name. L name is Zamora. Okay, I'm just being super obvious in my query names here. I'm going to click OK. Right now, here's that second thing that I created. It's the exact same query so far as this one. We're going to change that though. So I'm going to open it up though, and then here we go. Here's that same query. We didn't magically, it didn't magically like only show Zamora just because we typed it in our query name here. We need to change the SQL, right? And so I'll go into here, SQL view. Here's the same baseline query that I created before, and then so I'm gonna just change it to where the last name is only Zamora, okay? And that's how you pretty much write it. I'm gonna say where, and notice how I move my semicolon down to the bottom here, because a semicolon should be the very last thing. It should not be on every line, okay? So where last name is equal to, like we want it to be literally that employee, Zamora, okay? So this should hopefully work. You can even just do this, right click and go to datasheet view. Boom, there we go. Now we see Zamora, okay? So that's kind of that. Anyways, here we go. That is the gist. I'll show you the SQL for that again. So there we go. That's where I was telling you, like, this is, you can put little conditions in there that we only want to see a row, and like we only want to see these columns, and the last name must match Zamora. Okay, so that is kind of the gist there, right? So it's not too bad. It's not too bad so far. Now we will do. Let me show you how to do like that wildcard feature where you're searching for like some sort of value, like it starts with the letter S kind of a thing, right? So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste just because a lot of the base syntax is kind of similar. So I'm going to do this, copy, and then paste again. And I'm going to call this the query want. We only want to see employees that have the last name starting with S. Okay, so I'll say, and you'll see why. You heard me talk about it in the slides. Last name is like S. Okay, so we go here, pull the third query. There we go. All right, now I'm going to go into SQL. Let's see, just so we don't get blurry-eyed with other things. I'm just going to get rid of the emp ID column. Like, I don't really care about that. So it'll just be last name and their first name from the employees. And their last name, we want it so that their last name starts with the letter S. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say where last name like, and then I'm going to use single quotes here, S, and then in access we use here the asterisk, the star character, and then I close it out with another single quote here, right? If you're using another system, you would use, let me see, go back here, make this full screen, I guess. This is what I'm talking about. In Microsoft Access, we would write the syntax where I was doing with the star, the asterisk character. But if you're using something else like Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, stuff like that, you would actually want to get more in the habit of using the percent sign. Okay? So we write it this way, and that should work. It should show us all the employees who have a last name that starts with S. Notice that I'm not using the equal sign here. I'm using this word, this keyword like. All right. So I'll run the query, and there we go. All right. So the last name starts with S, and it can be anything after that, and that's what that's what our query did. All right. So go back to the SQL. You can see that, and let's kind of just keep on moving here. All right. The next thing I'm going to show you is the kind of wildcard type feature. But now, say for instance, we're curious, like here, let me pull up this whole departments thing. This is the whole table. Okay, I didn't do a query yet. There's what, 6 departments, 6 records, what Access Lite's saying. So there's 6 rows here, and there's like the A department, which is accounting, DP is design and production, and so forth, right? Say we want to query this table and we only want to see like departments. It's kind of a weird sounding query. We only want to see departments where it's 2 letters. Okay, so like for instance, the accounting would not be part of this query. It's 2 letters and it ends in the letter R. Okay, so for instance, we should see this thing, human resources, and this one, because the other ones should not match that. Like this has the letter R, but it's not like the last character here. You see what I'm saying? So I'm going to create that query. I'm going to start a whole new one just because there is a lot of differences. Mainly that the other queries I showed you, like this one, we're talking to the employees table. You got to tell it which table you're talking to. And we were talking a lot with this employees table, but now, just to kind of mix things up, we're going to use the departments table. Okay, so I'll just do the query. I'm sure you forgot already what we were searching for, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to create a new query, go into query design. I don't care about these graphical show table stuff. Go into SQL view. Here we go. This is the starting point there. Select. Now, in this case, I'm going to have it basically, I'm going to just pull in all of the columns, but I don't want to be lazy. I'm not going to use that star thing. I'm going to be explicit here to, practice what I preach. So, back over here, we're going to pull the department ID column and then the department column, right? So, that's how we got to write it, is department ID, comma, department. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of the semicolon for now. It's kind of obnoxious. We'll add that later. Then I'm going to go down to another line here, and then I'm going to say from the departments table, okay, and where. So what I'm doing is it has to be 2 characters. This thing here, 2 characters long. Okay, and it has to end in the letter R. It's a weird sounding query. I'm just showing you more the effect of how this wildcard feature works. Okay, so the way we could write this is where department ID is like, so it's 2 characters, but we don't care what the first character is. So in Access, Microsoft Access, we would do it like this. Okay, and I'll show you the effect of this in a bit. I just want to show you that, so in Microsoft Access, you want to use the question mark. But any other system, they want you to use an underscore character here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here. So this is why I wrote it with a question mark in this regard. All right. Now let's see the effect of this. I'm going to run the query, which we could go back if you're in this kind of interface. You might have to click back to here where it says design, and then click run. You can also, like I was saying, right click here and then go to datasheet view, and then there we go. So the query did work. Again, it's 2 letters long, this department ID thing, and it ends in the letter R. All right. So that's the effect of this wildcard type feature. Okay. And then let me see. I'm going to save this query. We're going to have a bunch of these queries. All right. This is my 4th one now. We're getting departments, and that's a single character wildcard. All right, I'll click OK. There we go. And we're just going to kind of keep on going here. All right. So now let's say if we were looking, let me say if we were opening here, like if I open up the employees table, the whole thing here, say we only want to see like where the last name starts with S, okay, but then the first name has to start with the letter D. Okay, so the way we'd write that is, and I'll just close this table down for now, get rid of the departments for now, that here I'll just kind of type this all, just might be faster. I don't know. Do this. I'm back into SQL view. Again, you can go up to here. Just doing it different ways, get you used to the interface. All right. So we're going to select and say we want the last name, first name. We want to see these columns. That's what it's saying. And then from the employees table, right, and where their last name starts with the letter S, okay, like so. But then we also only want to see the query where, like, we only want to see like last name starts with S and the first name starts with the letter D. So the way you would write that is like this. I'm going to go down another line. This is just by convention. What I'm doing here is I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you don't have to do these extra spaces. It's just kind of preferred by a lot of folks. All right, to make your syntax look nice and so forth. And the first name, we do that like thing again, like D. So it starts with, so last name starts with S, and the first name starts with D. Hopefully this works. I'll run this query. And there we go. So we only got one result in this regard. We got Sadler, Daniel Sadler. All right. And there we go. Let me do this. I'll save this thing. So this might sound kind of weird, but I'm 05A. Employees. Because we're going to have some variations on this. Last name, and I'm doing that and thing. And F name, like first name. You can ignore how I save my queries, but the main thing is, like, whatever you save your queries, make it descriptive so that you know what you're talking about, like what it's meant for, kind of a thing. All right. So there we go. I'll show you the SQL of this again, and it looked like such. All right. All right. So we're gonna change it up a little bit. Okay. So because of that, I'm just gonna kind of copy paste this whole thing. So here's that 05A thing. Copy, paste this in here. I don't like it starting with copy of, because then it messes up the organization over here. 05, I'll call it 05B. And whatever. Do this and with, we're going to use what I'm talking about, a hidden column. All right. It's not like technically hidden on the data table. It's just on the query, we may not realize there's another column involved of why we're even seeing it a certain way now. Okay. So that's what I mean by this hidden column filtered thing. All right. So with that being the case, that here's 05B, I got to change up the SQL here. So in this case, instead of like narrowing it down to their first name in sort of a way, we can do this. So I'm gonna get rid of this line here. All right, I'm gonna change this up. We still want to see the last name and first name. That's the only columns we're gonna see. From the employees table, last name begins with S, so forth. And we want the emp ID, the employee IDs, they have to be bigger than 1020. Okay, so notice that I wrote this in here, but it's not up in the select area. Okay, so I'm going to click run, and now we only see, we have two results returned now. We can, if we want, just to kind of see the effect of this, that, you know, emp ID, we want to see, well, what is their emp IDs? Well, it's like, oh yeah, they are bigger than 1020, right? We can kind of change this as we need. But more the effect that I've shown you here is in this regard that we don't actually have to see this little column over here, even though we're using it as like a condition to filter everything down. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, like this hidden column that you're filtering on, kind of a thing. All right, I'll run that again, and then we just see this. Okay, so that's kind of the gist that regard. Now, one of the things you definitely, especially if you're new to this kind of understanding, is like when I was going over, where are we at here? I did this kind of shorthand truth table thing. Is you want to be careful which one you're using. You don't just kind of like, I don't know, I'll use and, or maybe I'll use or. Like, no, you got to know why you're using one or the other. All right. So the main thing is, and they're not one, and is not better than or, and or is not better than and. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Okay. The thing that you got to know though is and is very kind of intense. Like both values that you're doing must be true to be true. Okay. But with or, if we're using this or situation, it's way more loosey-goosey. As long as one of these kind of conditions is true, like you're going to see that row. Okay. So I'll show you kind of a weird effect if you mess this up wrong. All right. So check this out. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to create, let's see, it was, which one? I think it was here. I think it was this one. I'm just backing up. Yeah, so in this case, look, we use the and thing, right? And to remind you, to refresh your memory, we're checking the last name starts with S and the last name, or the first name begins with D. Okay, so if I run the query, check out datasheet view, whatever, we got Sadler Daniel, right? Because it last name began with S and the first name began with D. So both conditions had to be present to see this result. Okay. Now, so this is the SQL and we're using the and here. So I'm going to copy this query, the 05A thing. I'm going to go copy, paste. We're kind of dealing slightly with a different subject, so I'm going to switch up the number to be like 06 now, and employees L name or F name. Okay, click that. I'm going to open that thing that I just copy pasted here. I'm going to change this up now. I'm going to go into SQL view here. The only change I'm doing here is instead of it being and, it's going to be or. Okay? You're like, oh, it should be about the same thing. It's like, no. You're going to have a wholly different query going on. All right? So I'm going to run this query, run that. Boom. Look at this situation. It's kind of a weird query when you think about it. It's like, I don't know why you would do this query. It's kind of a goofy query thing. It's like, so last name, it could be their last name starts with S. You're like, all right, so that's why we see this person. Or their first name could begin with D. So that's why we see Deanna Zamora here. All right, like their last name does not start with S, right? But it's because their first name starts with D. And then, yeah, so like, it's kind of a goofy thing here. And then then you see what we had before, Sadler Daniel in here, like, because both conditions were good. So then he shows up, all right? But yeah, so that's what you want. You want to be like really explicit. You want to know why you're choosing and, or like why you're choosing or. Okay, they definitely have different results, all right? And in this case, kind of, I don't know why this query you would have this kind of a weird, that'd be kind of pointless, it seems like. And then I'll show you another effect of this, how this works too, okay? Just kind of drill this in more. Let me see here, I'll just kind of copy paste this thing. Copy, paste. All right, so I'm gonna make this 06B. Got a bunch of these things, and blah blah blah. Let's see, or you'll understand why I call this later. I'm calling it the inverse of the 05B query. All right, that's right. It's kind of long-winded looking query name here. So what I'm talking about, that 05B. All right, so I made copy pasted this thing over here, but like 05B is this one. And this was one, this is where this query, what we were doing was that the, last name begins with S and the employee ID is greater than 1020. So in this one that I created before, if I go to run the query, go to data sheet view or whatever, we saw this regard, okay? And this was, I was doing that hidden column thing, right? I'll just maybe make it not hidden right now. I'll change that up so you can see, like, here's the effect of that. Like, their emp ID is greater than 1020 and their last name starts with S, right? You can see the effect of that. I'll remove this so give you the effect of the hidden column thing again. And there we go. And then what I can do is right click save, right? So I'm just refreshing your memory on this thing. Now, this thing I copied from that one or whatever, from a different one. Anyway, it sets, let me change this up. I think I copied the wrong one. Anyways, I'm gonna make it, instead of it saying, because we had and the emp ID was greater than 1020, right? That was the one before that I just showed you, right? So it looked like this. So let me prove you. It says like this: emp ID is greater than 1020, and the one I'm working on is the exact same thing, except I'm calling it a different query now. I'm also going to change this so you can see the emp ID thing here, because it'll make it more clear what I'm talking about. So the only change that I'm going to do here is that instead of having the last name begins with S and the emp ID is greater than 1020. Well, what if we switch this to an OR? Now check this out. So if we run this thing, look at this crazy stuff. Like, it works, but you're like, what are we doing here? Because so the last name starts with S in this case. I'm like, all right, but wait, this person does not have the employee ID of greater than 1020. And it's like, yeah, because we're using OR. Only one of the conditions have to be true for us to see the result in the output here. Okay, same thing with this guy. Last name starts with S, but it's not a big enough employee ID, so on and so forth. And then you even got like Peter Chovanec here. You're like, well, his last name does not start with S. Yeah, but the employee ID is bigger than 1020. So that's the effect. You got to be careful which one you're using. Again, and is not better than and or is not better than and. It just depends on the situation, right? And to highlight this, to show that the or thing is not worthless, I'm not trying to bash on this, all right, is there could be practical examples of why you definitely would want to use or, all right? So say, for instance, there's like, you're working at some organization and they got like, you're literally in the same room. Like say you work for the accounting department, right? Or maybe for you watching this video, you work in the IT department, right? But then just because of the design of the building or whatever, that you are sitting right next to, like, there's all the IT people, and then there's like the accounting department is literally in the same room as you, right? And so say the managers of the area, they want to like boost morale or something like that, and they're like, hey, let's like, we want to know everybody's birthday so we can like jointly celebrate whoever and blah 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 all at the same time and build camaraderie and stuff, right? I'm just giving kind of a backstory to see like why you might want to come up with the query that I'm about to create here. All right, so that's what I'm saying is like we want to see all employees like on the system, that but we want it to only see, like, we want to see their birthdays, their name and stuff like that, but we only want to see it where if they're part of either the accounting department or if they're part of the IT department. All right, so I'm going to just do this. I'm going to go create. Let's do the skin query design. Skip this graphical stuff. You can click that thing. Here, we want to see, get rid of that for now, the last name of the folks, first name, their birthday, and this is the column how it was created, birth date, and their department ID, right? From the employees table, where the department ID is equal to A, meaning like the accounting department. 1, 2, 3, 4, or we got to kind of repeat this again. Or the department ID is equal to the IT department. Okay, notice that we have to repeat this department thing twice. Newbie mistake is you just kind of do department ID equals A or IT. Like no, you got to like spell the whole thing out again. All right, it's like a different clause of condition kind of a thing. All right. So let's see if this query works. Let me check. I'll run the query. And then there we go. We should only see people from what I was telling you about. Like we see the last name, first name, the birth date, and we only see people from either the A for accounting or the IT department, right? We shouldn't see anybody else. And that's it. There we go. Not too bad, right? Okay. I'll go back to, you can see the query code stuff, right? And that's where, so look, or is now useful in this regard because this is like what we wanted to happen, okay? So let me name this thing. I'll call this 06C employees B-Day if department A or IT. Let's call it like that. All right. Boom. All right. Let's see here. Let's keep on moving here. All right. Now, say we want to know, like, we want a report of all employees that, like, their salary is between $40,000 and $60,000, right? Not less than that, not more than that. Like, it's got to be between 40 and 60K, right? 40 and $60,000 dollars for their salary. So what we could do is, I'll just for now, I'll just copy on this last one. Copy, paste, change it up. Oh yeah, I'm gonna call it. I'm gonna call it 07A. The employees salary is between, remember that thing I was showing you on the slides, the between thing? 40K and like 60K, right? Do that. Let me change it. Let me see. I can open it up. I didn't, I got to change the SQL now. Here we go. Let's see. I don't care about their birth date. And then, you know what? I'm going to put annual salary here. Annual salary. Did I spell it right? Annual salary. Okay. And then department ID. That's fine, I guess. I don't want it this at all. Okay. So again, the salary is between $40,000 and $60,000, right? So I'm going to say like, well, all right, well, where the annual salary between 40, 1, 2, 3, and 60, 1, 2, 3, 60,000, right? And that should hopefully work. Let me see. I'll run the query. And that seems pretty legit. Alright. We got 51, 46, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. I don't see any higher, lower values than what we specified, the 40 and 60K thing. Alright. So, you get it? See how this can be very useful? Knowing just some simple SQL. Like, this is pretty common stuff, right? Or like managers, you might need to know this kind of stuff. And anyhow. But what if you're like, all right, well, how do we organize this thing? Like, yeah, it's all we got the report, but like, hey, we want to like we care about like sorting it so that it's like from lowest value to highest value. Like we want to see the low 40s first, and then see the higher values later in the thing. Now, if you're lame, you could do this. You could all in Microsoft Access. You could click this down arrow thing, and then click this thing as sort smallest to largest. But it's something to know, I guess. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to click cancel. All right, we're going to do the cool SQL version of this. All right, so I'm going to just copy paste this thing. Copy paste. And I'm going to call this 07B Bravo. And just so it kind of reminds me of why I even created this. So it's the 07A sorted ascending ASC. Alright, click that here. And this thing up. It's that same query, but we're going to have, oh, what did I do? I must have copied the wrong, whatever. I'll just do this. Take my SQL code in here. I can do this. I'm going to, you could either, select all these things manually, or you can do like Control A and like Control C copy. I'll go into here, SQL. I'm going to get rid of that thing. Yeah, there we go. So that's what we were starting with, right? But we want to sort it like by the annual salary, where it is from lowest value to highest value. Okay, so all we got to do is this. We're going to say order by annual salary. It's kind of annoying. You see this annual salary a bunch of times, but we're using this column for different reasons each time, right? And we're going to sort it ASC, meaning ascending, or like going up, lowest to highest, and that should work. I'll run this, and there we go. We got the lowest value. Now it's all like nice and organized in that sort of way. Okay. And I'll save this. Let's see. Maybe I didn't save this. That's why it like copied like the old weird thing that I copied a couple steps behind. I think that's what must be going on. One of the things that, regardless of that issue, is Microsoft Access. It kind of annoys me. Let's see. So it says ASC. Like if you, it's one of these things that you like close the database down and then you bring it back up and then you like open this query again. They'll like actually remove this thing for you, and I'm like, stop doing that. Like I want to see my full code here. Stop like trying to simplify things. and stuff. Because like the reason why it bugs me is access, especially if you use any of that query wizard nonsense that I was telling you about, or like you use this horrible thing like this, like, oh my, wow, that's so much easier looking at this thing. You're like, yeah, no, it's not, right? Like, I hate using this interface. First of all, my font's too massive for this. I could make the column bigger, I guess, but it's too much going on, and it's more obnoxious, I feel like, going through this process. And then, let's see, did it mess up my SQL code? It's like, sometimes if you use that query by QBE stuff, they like change up all the SQL. They're like the most complicated looking SQL ever, and it's like, why is it they're like being ultra explicit on everything? It's like, oh my goodness. So that's another reason why I don't like using that query by this thing, because God forbid I change something here, it's gonna like mess up all my SQL over here. It's gonna make it like twice as long. It doesn't need to be. All right. So that's what regular SQL is. Just if you just know it, it's just easier. Plus, it's also one of these things like, usually, again, yes, you could use what I'm showing you because I'm showing you Microsoft Access, but a lot of times you use SQL more as like a programmer or something like that. So that's why you want to get comfortable in more the actual syntax of how this all works. Okay. So there we go. We're sorting it ascending, right? And that's how it looks. Let's see. I'm going to save this. I think if I copy paste this thing now, because I'm going to change it the other way. Instead of it having low to high, or let's go the other way, right? So do this, copy, paste. It's about the same. I'm just going to call it this. Help me remember. So that 078 thing, but we're going to go descending. Okay. Then if I open this thing up, yeah, okay, now, there we go. That's what I want to see. So now the SQL that I'm changing is all the same. Yeah, see what I'm talking about? I got rid of my ASC thing because I didn't change it to say descending yet. Access drives me nuts. Hey, Microsoft people, if you're watching this video, take out that so-called feature. It drives me nuts. Anyways, we're going to go descending now. So all we have to do is, what we would do is that we would change, instead of it saying, let me skip back over here. Before I had ASC, right, for ascending, lowest to highest value. Now we're just going to sort it the other way. We're going to descend. So, let's see, I'll save that. Go into datasheet view, and there we go. See how it's like the other way around. That, I'll show you side by side. Here's low to high. This was ascending. And then the other way around, descending, it's going highest to lowest. All right. Yeah. Now, before I go on to this other query, what I will, since you can see it right now, is I just made sure that, say, one of these, just for the effect of using, I'm going to explain how to search for null values. And if you're not familiar with the idea of null, like N-U-L-L, in a database kind of context, it's kind of like a nothing value. So in this case, it doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. Sometimes that's actually there's nothing to put there for somebody. So say, for instance, we have Janelle Brummel, okay, and she's going to be making $51,000. Maybe she's not an employee yet or something like that. And so that's why they're like, well, where are we going to put her at? I think we might put her in like the accounting department or whatever. Like, I don't know where she's going to go. But they just wanted to generally fill her out in the system, and then they'll put the department later. Okay, so maybe this is intentional of why this is blank. That's kind of the idea, right? So, but she's the only person in the system that has this so far. So I'm just kind of setting you up of I'm kind of pre-explaining the query before I write it. All right. So say we want to design a query so that we can find, from time to time, because that's the thing when you're using queries, that it's not like a static spreadsheet. This stuff, if we have, say, 3 months from now, say we got another employee coming in and they don't have an apartment yet, well, we could have a query design where we just double click and who does not have a department yet, kind of a thing. That's what That's what the query, it's every time you open up one of these queries, it's right then asking that question against your data of what is what. Okay, so this is not like fixed data stuff, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to just search for, like I just mentioned, the null value thing. So let me see, I'll go up here again, create, so just get used to going different areas of how to do this stuff. Query design, because we're cool. Don't care about graphicals nonsense. And then you can do this down here, SQL view. Right, and we want to see just like, say, our most famous columns here, last name, first name, and say department ID, right? Like, who doesn't have a department? And we have from the employees table, and how we do that, we're looking for like blank values in a general sense, right? So I'm going to say like where department ID is null. Okay, it's like meaning is like a nothing value thing. That's what null means in a general sense. So this. So if I did this right, I'm going to go here, right click, I can just go to datasheet view. Boom, there we go. We see Janelle Brummel, and she has like no department here. Okay, so that's what that was like the whole intent of what we wanted to do. Okay, I'll go back to SQL view. This is the code for everything and such. I'll just save this thing, 8. I'm just type this real quick. ID is null. I'm just writing a little note to myself. Ensure Brummel has no department ID. So access, you can kind of get really long-winded on these query names and stuff. Some other systems, they have some limitations here and there, but anyways, look at this super long-looking query name here. But since I'm a teacher and I like to look at my stuff later, right? I like very descriptive query names. All right, so don't make fun of me. All right, so check this out. One of the things that gets a little goofy when you're dealing with null values is, I don't know, like databases, like it gets all kind of squeamish and it like gets annoying to deal with sometimes. All right, so say we do this. Okay, say we want to do a report where like we want to find all employees except for those in like the research and development. Like I'll show you the department thing here. The research and development folks. Say for some reason we don't care about listing them, and so we could do that by checking who does not have this RD department ID. So we just want to like find everybody except for them. Okay. Well, and let me see. I'm going to close departments down. Right. The query. Let's see here. Here, let's say. Okay. So I'll just go down to here. This is the Brummel null thing. I'm just going to copy paste this one. This one's going to be different overall. So 09A employees not in the RD department. Okay. So go into here, change up my query now. That it's all the same basic stuff here. Instead, so we do not want, and I'll show you the, I'll go back to this stuff. Here is when you're using these comparison operators, this is how, at least in Microsoft Access, these are the syntax that how you would write it. Okay, that well, this is what we want to use. We want to see like every person in the system that does not is not part of the RD department, like it's not equal to having that value. Okay, so that's why I'm writing this weird looking stuff here. Okay, these opposing angle brackets or something like that. Okay, it's not equal to the RD department. Okay, so that sounds simple and obvious and such. So if we run the query, looks all fine and dandy. One of the things, though, that is kind of interesting about databases and stuff like that is notice how Brummel is not listed. Maybe I'll be lame for right now. I'm just going to sort this by A to Z. So I just did the visual way of sorting this. That's how you do it. There's cooler ways in SQL, but I'm just doing a quick thing right now. So we should have seen Brummel, right? Because Brummel was currently does not have a department, right? Because we ran this thing, and she's like, yeah, she has no department. So then you would think, well, obviously she's not in the RD department. Why isn't she showing up? And that's where like there's this like a null, like a blank value. It's like this weird thing. It's kind of like this limbo zone kind of voodoo kind of like data point thing, where it doesn't really know what to do with it, and so it's just like, I don't know. We don't know, so we're just going to exclude her. It's kind of weird. All right. So that's the thing. Like, our query works, I guess, but we're actually kind of like ignoring a person, right? So that's kind of weird. Say we actually wanted to see Brummel in here too. Like, wait, why isn't she showing up? Okay. So, anyways, this is how we wrote the query like this. All right. And then, let's see, I'm going to save this. So, to fix this, if you wanted to include everybody, even if they're not in a department, but definitely not those people in the research and development group, so we got to be kind of very explicit here. So I'm going to copy paste this one. Let's see here. Copy, paste. There we go. I'm just changing this up slightly. 09 Bravo. B. Here we go. Not blah blah blah. Same all that. Or null, right? Kind of a thing. So we're gonna change. I gotta click on this one. Open that up. Oh, what did I do? 9A. Anyway, change this thing up. Last name, first name, department of the employees. I don't know where I got that dialogue. Anyways, should just work. Didn't change anything. Hold on one sec. I don't like that. I'm just gonna do this. Copy. I'm just copying the code here. Access is acting kind of goofy for some reason. So I'm just going to do create, query design, ignore this thing, SQL here. This should definitely work. Okay, there we go. Save this thing. 09, I'm going to rename this thing again. 09B and employees not in the RD department, or maybe right this, or null. Oh, I think it's, hold on a second. Gotta love technical problems, right? Get rid of this one, and then I think what's going on, I'm gonna just delete this thing. Yeah, whatever. Starting over. Killing me here, access. Alright. Copy paste, that was all good. There we go. My apologies. 09B. Please. Not in the RD department. Or null. Okay. Yeah. It's working, right? That's right. I made it work. Woo! Here we go. Alright. Anyhow, I don't know why I was getting issues. So, remember that the gist was we didn't see Brummel in there. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why aren't we seeing Brummel? And say we sort A to Z or whatever. And it's like, why is she not showing up here? And so what we got to do, I'm going to go to SQL view. What we got to do is you got to be really explicit with these null value things. Like when you ever have to deal with that and it's not showing up in your queries. All right. So then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, or like, because we don't want to see anybody in the RD department. Okay. Let's see here. Or department ID is known. Yeah, okay. Right, now we see Brummel in here. Okay. The reason why, I was just thinking, like, wait, does this logically work again? Is that here we don't, okay, because we're doing this where condition thing. And in this thing, we're doing like two different things in a sort of sense. So in this case, we don't want to see, in this is the not equals thing, right? So we don't want to see anybody show up with RD in there, but then we're like, hey, wait a minute. But we're okay, like, or, you know what, it's cool if we poll people and their department is null. That's what we're kind of doing here. That's the gist. All right, we're kind of like making sure this is clear. And then if we want, we can even do this instead of lamely sorting it out graphically order by, you know, say last name, right? Okay, that's what I was doing anyways. And ascending. So I like to be explicit here. Going to datasheet view, and there we go. Okay. So, and now we finally see Brummel. Okay. Another way you can also kind of compare and contrast the situation is here. Notice on the other query that I had where we weren't being explicit about that null value process, and I run the query and so on and so forth. Notice the little tiny looking font. I don't know if you can see it. It says in total that there are, on this query, we're getting 1 of 25 records, or regular people, we just say 1 of 25 rows, okay, in this result process. But over here, when I finally included Brummel in here, we finally have 26 rows. Okay, on this again, this one had 25. Pardon me, I need some more coffee there. All right, so in this one we had 25 results, 25 rows showing up. But in this one there's 26, so you can definitely tell there's a bit of a change there. Okay, yeah. Now we're almost getting through. Here's some easy peasy ones coming up, and then I'm gonna end later on kind of a special case thing, kind of ish. All right. So stick with me. I'm going to start another query here. What we're going to do, say, you know, pretty common, is like how we did before. Let's see, which one was it? We were talking about the salaries, right? So this looks kind of similar. Before, I was showing you a range of numbers, like the between one. But say we're like, oh well, we don't want to just exclude. We want to see everybody of their salary. Okay, and we want to sort from high to low, right? We're going to mix it up slightly. So let me just let's go create, design. There we go. The SQL view thing. All right. So I want to see annual salary, and then say just last name and then first name. Okay. From the employees table, right? But we just want to sort it by their salary. So all we got to do is just order by annual salary and say descending, because we're going high to low this time. You got to keep this in your mind how this works. So I like to think about it like you're climbing down a mountain, you're descending, kind of a thing. This should work. Let's see, I'll do it this way. Go to datasheet view, and boom, right? There we go. We got some high dollar folks in here, right? And yeah, that's kind of just with that thing. So I'll save this query. Finally at so-called number 10. Employees by salary, high to low. Okay. And there we go. All right. Now, say, and you know, you could go the other way with the ascending and stuff like that too. Say you have another report of just seeing like a very common thing. You just need to see all employees that are just sorted A to Z. Okay. So create, redesign, don't care about this stuff, and then you can also just, you know, click here, whatever. That do select your last name and first name, and then say we just need to see their department ID, right? From the employees table, and then we just need to sort it by last name A to Z. So what you do is order by last name and then ASC, right? For ascending, you're climbing up the mountain kind of thing. And so in a kind of computer context, A to Z is what we're doing here. All right. Let's double check. I'll run this, and then there we go. That looks pretty legit. And make sure every time you run a query, always double check that it's actually like really working. All right. So, you know, in my system there are 31 people, which we can maybe confirm. Say I'll open up this thing, employees table, and we're like, this thing pulls up, and blah blah blah. Finally, it shows 31, which means there's 31 different people here. Like, all right, great. So then our query, if we're pulling everybody up, we should see 31 here. You always just want to double check everything. All right, double, triple check. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's see, I'll show you the code again. It's nothing too hard right there. Okay, let me save this as something slightly more memorable. I'm also doing this so that like when you're looking at the video, you can see which tab I'm clicked on, right? So that it's like way more obvious. Say you're studying this later, say if you're trying to do something similar, like here, the highlighted tab thing, you can see where I'm at, like what I'm doing. So you're not like kind of lost, like what is he working on now? Like, oh, where do we go? So that's kind of another reason why I do this. So that's it. Just save this thing. It should be double check save, and there we go. We got sorted A to Z. So it's not too hard, right? Okay, the last query that I'll show you is this thing. Where are we at? Blah 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 blah. Here's it back here. Yeah. So again, this is Microsoft Access. You do it this way, right? Other systems, you got to look at their documentation of like, how do we find a specific date or something like that. Now in this case, what I did here was I'm doing like, oh, where some column is equal to this exact date, okay? But what if we're like, well, what if we have this report where we need to find all employees where their birth date, like they were born in the 1980s or up, okay? You're like, well, how do I write that code? Well, it's not too hard when you think about it, all right? So I'll show you that. Let's do create, query design, here, SQL view, there we go, and then here we are. I'll add that semicolon later. So select emp ID and their last name, and then say their birth date, okay? And getting it from the employees table, and we want to have it again. We want to find only employees that were born in the year 1980 and up, okay? So, you know, 1981, 1982, things of that nature, right? One way you could write this, there might be different ways of doing this, but you can just do it like this, like where the birth date, okay, is greater than or equal to, say, January 1st of 1980, right? So, and then we have to use accesses to like these delimiter things, these number sign situations. So like 1/1/1980, and you make sure you have the other corresponding number sign thing here, right? And then I'm going to add the semicolon there, and that should work. Let's double check. Let's do that. And then you can see this situation. So if you're just looking at the dates, like, oh, yeah, we only see people 1980, 1980, 81, da da da. I didn't organize this, right? So that's why it jumps down to 1980 again. So we are only seeing people from this time frame, right? And we're only seeing 9 of these employees, not 31, but only 9. So these are the quasi-youngsters or something like that, right? Of the organization. So let's see here. I'm just going to save this as query 12. Employees, B-days, 1980s, and up. Okay, sounds pretty good. I'll show you the code again. Boom. There we go. That's kind of the gist. That's all I kind of want to cover in this video, to explore pretty much how all of the SQL syntax that I was highlighting before in the slides, like, you know, practical situations of how this all works and so forth. So yeah, I hope you learned a lot, and I really appreciate you watching. I know this has been kind of a longer video lecture, but you know, I'm a college professor and such, so I'm used to 3-hour style classes, but also I think overall, like, it should, you know, especially if you were really trying to study this and understand it, you can definitely spend a lot more time, and sometimes you don't even feel like you understand some of the basics. So hopefully you got a lot out of this, because we definitely touched a lot of ground. I'll give you a reminder, some of the stuff is, you know, remember some of these terms. DB for database, relational database management system, SQL, DBA, so on and so forth. What is SQL? Oh, sweet, it's standardized. Generally, you know, access kind of deviates, stuff of that nature. There's this other thing, PSM, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, and then, like I said, now, like this SQL syntax overview, right? You see what I'm saying? Like this slide right here should hopefully, like, now you see what I'm talking about. Like, now that you got more exposure to this, this is like just a good kind of general reference of like, oh, this is the flow of how you write your syntax, all right? Because one of the things that you can't kind of jumble this up. It's got to be like in a very specific way that you write this kind of thing. So that's all I got. Thanks again so much for watching, and yeah, please feel free to also check out some of the other videos that I have. I have it on a playlist type format, so I'm trying to suggest you to watch it in certain orders. And that's all I got. I hope you have a good day. All right, you take care.